We are holding on Amud Nun Gimel, at the paragraph that begins V'nimtza muva mikol zeh. So let's make sure we're still, this is a longer mimer, and it goes much more in depth into the points it's making. It's a person is liable to accidentally lose the thread. So let's always make sure that we still have the thread of what's going on over here. Our objective is to try and explain why Hashem wanted to create the world with Midas Hadin rather than with Midas Harachamim. So in this Maimer, we're giving a different pshat than we gave in Shuvi Yisrael, which I'm not going to repeat now. But in this Maimer, we're giving a pshat that through creating the world with Midas Hadin, it made it possible for the Nivroim to be Taken Nivroim, that's the pshat, a yesh v'davar nifra b'fnei atzmai, a metzius, that there should be a helem v'hester on elikus. The elikus of Atzilus needed to be concealed in order to make viable the existence of the Nivroim, just like we had in today's Tanya. If you've learnt it yet, that similar to the point that where the Nivroim would not been able, without Shekhinah, without Malchus, without Dibra Elyon, without the Lavush of Kavod Malchus, the Lavush, all the things we described, it wouldn't have been possible to have the Dvarim Nifradim. And so we're going into being ma'ayin into this notion of how Malchus is able. So the pshat of Midas Hadim would be that the Eibishter is ma'alim or master himself, is mitzamtzim himself through the Oisius Hadibur of Malchus, through the Helen Behester of Malchus, then further on with the Parsa between Malchus and Bia, that enables there should be the Metzias of Nivroim and the Dvarim Nifradim, such that they should be able to serve Hashem in that manner, as the Dvarim Nifradim. So there should be a notion of Melucha. And in order to understand that better, we're going very much be'iyun into the moshel of Dibur, how Oisius HaDibur function. And there's a key component to the way Oisius HaDibur are able to be Mailim U'Master, to be able to conceal and hide the Eir HaSeichel in the way it communicates. So our first explanation was, the first part of the explanation in the Maimah was that the Oisius HaDibur are completely Mailim U'Master. It's a complete Helen V'Hester. There's no inherent connection between the sounds, the phonological sounds that are produced by speech and the concepts that a person is attempting to convey, such that only a person who understands the concepts from before, a Chacham Mikvar, is able to understand the coding, the encoding that is in speech. So in a sense, through speech you encode things, and then the listener has to decode the language in order to understand what's going on. So at that point in the explanation, you could think that there's these two things. You have the koyach hagilui of a person's creativity, his analysis, his seichel b'chlal, chachma bina, das to an extent too, and that is the intellectual consciousness. And then they have another component of the self called dibur, and when you match the two, you get the intellectual speech that a person is conveying to another person. What we called in the first Maimah the hashpah chitzonis. Yeah, when you're trying to be mashpia seichel. That's what that is the thing. But they're two separate things, and they sort of come into contact with each other at the stage of speaking. What we're doing now is we're saying that actually they're much more intertwined than that would suggest. That the Oisius HaDibur are just sort of in essence a next phase, a next stage in the emergence of Oisius. Oisius are not some parallel universe to Seichel. You have to realize that Oisius are integral to all aspects of self-expression. If you have chachma, it's because you have Oisius. If you have bina, it's because you have Oisius. Everything about you is because you have Oisius. Oisius enable for there to be bichlal the expression of the self. The difference is that at different stages of expression, the Oisius are sometimes more subtle, to the point of being completely to the point where a person is completely unaware that they even have Oisius there, such as in the point of a creative genius. When you come up with an idea, at that moment there doesn't seem to be any Oisius. Although there must be Oisius. Ki ef shel gilu b'li Oisius, to know they're always there. And at the stage of Dibur, what's happening there is that the Oisius have become much more substantive, physical, material, and noticeable and separate. Dibur is, in a sense, a way of the self producing something outside of the self. It's the very first stage of a sort of somebody creating something. The sounds, the sound waves, everything is externalized. This act of externalization is a major step in the sort of development of the self. And you have these Oisius HaDibur, which are B'chinas Yesh. And it's because they're B'chinas Yesh, that's why they're externalized, number one. That's why they're able to be Ma'ilem U'Mastir. That's why it has all of the qualities that it has. The Dibur has that significance. But the notion of Oisius is not, doesn't originate in Dibur. The notion of Oisius is fundamental to every stage of self-expression, all the way back to the very Etzem HaNefesh, because the Nefesh is Malaya Oisius. The Sheirish HaOisius is in Etzem HaNefesh. The core identity of a person is this notion of Oisius. And what did we say the notion of Oisius? Well, it depends which Oisius. But the ultimate goal of a person having Oisius is to be able to have Oisius HaDibur. That it shouldn't remain just the Oisius of, in the creative mind that you have these Oisius which you're not even self-aware of, or even the Oisius HaMachshava that you have in Bina. The goal is to have Oisius HaDibur. And what is the whole point of Oisius HaDibur? What did we say at the beginning of this Maimah? Kol inyan HaDibur hu legalis l'zulasei, gila hazulas. So think about this. It's a very profound inyan in understanding yourself, understanding the world, understanding everything. The whole, if you want to, what do you know about your Etzem HaNefesh? What is your Etzem HaNefesh? Your Etzem HaNefesh is Malaya Oisius. The Sheirish HaOisius is higher than everything else. The Sheirish HaOisius that you have, right from the first Maimah. Why is Dibur able to have this effect on a person? Because of the Sheirish HaOisius. Sheirish HaOisius is deeper than Seichel, deeper than everything. And what is that Sheirish HaDibur? What are these Oisius? What is the point of it? The Galis L'Zulasei. The whole premise of the self is the other, is the Zulas. That in order to be an Ani, to be able to be a Yesh V'Dova and a Metzias, have your own identity, have your own neshama, and have everything. What are you? You're B'Shvil HaZulas. In the whole Hisbonenus about Abbas Yisrael, about everything, about the Musig of Achdus Yisrael, Abbas Yisrael. You appreciate, if you go through this Hisbonenus, about what is the fundamental notion of selfhood. It's not isolationism. It's not a separateness. It's not a narcissism. It's not a self-indulgence. If you want to get to the very core of who you are, the core of who you are is B'Shvil HaZulas. It's a very important Nakuda. So we have these Oisius. The Oisius, when it comes to Dibur, is the full emergence of the full product of what the whole point of Oisius are, in order to be able to have a Yesh that can be Mailim on the self and all the Giluyim of the self, and conveyed to the Zulas. Now, we explained in the very last paragraph the important idea that a person's the phonetical sounds that a person is able to produce, which ultimately become words, which then together can become sentences. They are not just learnt traits that a person has from being a baby and hearing other people speak. As I told you to read the introduction to The Phonological Mind by Iris Barrett. Mrs. No, it's Mrs. It's actually Mrs. Mrs. Iris, or Miss, I don't know, Iris Barrett. Very good book. Pass me the book again. I'll show if people are going to be watching, they should be able to see this book. It's worth reading the whole book, but you get a sense about where the research is on at the moment. This is already an older book now, so 2012, about phonology, and how, as she argues there, that there are inbuilt structures in the self that can explain phonology, and it's not you can't understand it as it being just something that is a learnt practice, a trained, something that this is by convention, by habit, by memory, all these things, but rather it's something that is inbuilt into the self, and that helps explain a little bit the rudimentary ideas that we had here about the argument about why the Oisius Adibur don't come from the Moitzais, they don't come from those points of articulation. It's not because of these oral systems that produce Oisius, but rather the self is what produces the Oisius. Obviously, here's deeper than what it says there. There is talking about Seichel, and here Seichel is already Madreg of Gilui. Here we say that the Oisius come from the Etzem, even not deeper than the Seichel. Yeah, that's where we're up to. And we're going to continue our biur of Oisius, because the more we understand Oisius, well, the more we're going to be able to understand the Helam and the Tzimtzum that occurs in Malchus of Atzilus, which is a result of Midas Hadin, which enables the Metzias HaIlamis. So, before we start, the argument is that in order to get to these Oisius Hadibur b'Bechinas Yesh is affected, the changing imbalance of the intensity of the Oir and the hiddenness of the Oisius to the Tzimtzum HaOir and the emergence of the substantive Oisius. The reason behind that is because of the Tzimtzum in the Oir, the Gevura of the Oir. The Oir's Tzimtzum enables the emergence of the Kalim of the Oisius to be able to effectively conceal it. Okay? So we want to, instead of seeing it as two oppositional forces of Oir and Kali, Oir and Oisius, and that one is in a state of absolute radiance and expression. The other is a container to contain that, and they're just oppositional forces. We're saying no, they're not oppositional forces. That the Oir is the means by which the Oisius are able to fulfill their function. They work in tandem to produce this result of a Metzumtzum Dika Oir and Kalim b'Bechinas Yesh, or Oisius b'Bechinas Yesh. Yeah? So we're going to continue that point. So, based on all of the above, we find it to be the case. Shaha-Oisios hein be'etzem hanefesh. That's what the Oisios are originally. V'zeu sibas kol metzias ha-Oisios nimshachim misgalim min etzem hanefesh. And it's because the Oisios are in etzem hanefesh that there is the emergence of Oisius from the nefesh. V'ha-moitzois hen kelim levad laha-Oisius. And these moitzois, these points of articulation, are just kelim for the Oisius. Just like we said, what she explained in the book there very nicely, how it's not to deny the impact of the oral and the oral systems on the ultimate phonological structure of letters and words, but they are not the makers of that. They are just the kelim, and they obviously, by being a keli, it shapes it and it helps define it. And the same thing is with kol. It's sound. So the vocal cords here. Here we're talking about the vocal cords. We're not even talking about the points of articulation. We're going much earlier in the vocalization process. That it's just that the kol is just a keli to be able to convey the oisius hadibur, which originate in the etzem hanefesh. Al etzem mitziyuson hu be'etzem hanefesh. The concept of oisius doesn't originate there; it originates in the etzem hanefesh. Misham nimshachim begili, from where it's possible that they can be nimshach and they can go be nimshach into the kelim, first into kol and then into the moitzois. But yesh look at this bracket, very interesting. And this explains the difference between a human being and a parrot. A parrot, even though it speaks, we don't call a speaker human speaker. It's just that the bird can be taught how to manipulate its vocal cords and its beak, that it's able to produce what might be approximated as letters and then words. In the case of the bird, why is it able to make phonological sounds? Is taka because of its vocal cords and its points of articulation. But that's not what speech is. Speech is not just producing sounds with your mouth. A speaker is someone specifically who's able to produce oisius that come from the etzem hanefesh. They are the cause of why a person's speaking. It's not just because they can manipulate their mouth as like it would be a musical instrument. And the similar is true when you have someone who's a mute and they're taught how to speak. So through speech therapy, somebody who's got problems with speaking is able to potentially speak. So such a person is basically they're being taught how to manipulate their mouth and their vocal cords and everything just to be able to produce letters and words. And they become accustomed to it. Through training, and therapy, they can improve. But api halacha, they're still treated as an ilim, even if they've got some form of speech that they're able to produce. They're not considered a medaber, because for them the speech is not coming from the etzem hanefesh. The speech is coming from the mitzvahs.
Well, maybe they did have speech etzem hanefesh and just the mitzvahs were messed up, and now they fixed the mitzvahs.
Could be, right?
It can't be otherwise. Because speech from etzem hanefesh, every etzem hanefesh has speech.
The case of the ilim is question. I don't know. I have to look up exactly how it works. Right. What the medical condition is. It's not.
You can have speech that's not from etzem hanefesh. You're saying.
Yeah.
You can have an etzem hanefesh that doesn't have speech in it. It's not.
No, that you can't.
So you do have the just in case it's messed up.
I don't have enough knowledge to be able to elaborate at the moment.
Fine.
But I'm happy to think about it more.
Okay.
But a parrot for sure.
Right.
Okay. Now, v'hinei, anu royim, again, anu royim. It's remarkable the extent and the amount of anu royims we have over here. Anu royim ha-hefresh bein ha'oisius hanal. These oisius, the oisius hadibur and the oisius hamachshava, we can see them the difference between them. The oisius hadibur hin oisius murgoshim beyoyis b'bechinas yesh. speech involves letters and words which are very, very much felt and experienced. They have an impact on the material world. To the extent that even another person is able to hear them. But when it comes to the letters of thought, they are much more subtle. Nobody else is able to be aware of them. But to the self, to oneself, there is a sensation of thought. A person is able to feel the fact that they're speaking. Those oisias have substance to them, to the self. But they're not incomparable to the oisias hadibur, which are mamish b'bechinas yesh. Yeah? And that's why we say that Isis Machshava is on the Madrega v'chitzenius Bina. Remember before we were talking about Chachma and Bina, Chachma being the creative mind, Bina being the analytical mind, that even in the analytical mind, the Machshava that a person is self-conscious of are the Isis of Machshava, which are on the level of chitzenius Bina. Amna b'pnimius Bina, Sham ein ha'Isiyos negoshim kolkach. But on a deeper level of Bina, a deeper level of the analytical process, a person is not aware of the Isis, just like they're not aware of the Isis that are in Chachma. Here we're going to explain the difference in different dargas in Bina. So in Pnimius Bina is not the Arichas Habiur, and the Reichav of the Musug, of the Haskalah which was in Chachma. That's in Chitzonius Bina. In Pnimius Bina is the Nakuda Hatamtsis min Kol HaSaga. So first of all, after the creative idea, it has to, you might say that, oh, I thought that Chachma was the Nakuda Hatamtsis, was Nakuda. There it's a Nakuda Mamash. Here we come at Nakuda Hatamtsis, sort of another stage in a process. When you have an idea, there's the flash, what we call the Baraka Maverick, which has, which as it comes can immediately go. And Pnimius Bina is a sort of a grasping of the Nakuda of that thing. But it's taka a grasping. It's not going to go away necessarily. But it doesn't help you. It doesn't help you so much to be able to just have the Nakuda Atamsis. The whole purpose of Bina is to process it to the point where you have the Oirich and the Oimek and the Reichav. You have, which is all in Chitzenius Bina. In Pnimius Bina, you have the Tamsis, this sort of what we call like the cordial, right? The concentrate. Then it's going to be mixed with the water. You can expand it to its full potential. Okay, so it's different the way I explained. It's not what I was wrong. Although I believe these two stages are necessary. That after you have the Haskalah of Chachma, Bina has to, first of all, it doesn't start, working already from a broad shetach. It first of all has to define what it is trying to elaborate, what it is trying to analyze. The Chachma itself is not even something which is, you can't be teifus it even. Bina has to be teifus nakuda. Okay? Then you go through the process, which is what I was talking about before. Then you go through the process of analysis. The full arichis. But then you get to a stage that after kol arichis, you're able to get back to the nakuda. You might think about it like the Mishnayos and the Gemara and then the halacha. So the Mishnayos is a kitzur. It's a tamt in itself is a tamtis of what is not even which is inyan bal pesach. It's not b'chsav. It's bringing it takes the nakud of something. This is something to work from. You then have the whole analysis of the Gemara, and then you come back to the tamsis. What is the nakud? What is the point? What is the point of all this arichas? So pnimius bina is that tamsis, that conclusion. The nakuda that was being elaborated upon is reduced in a sense, or back into its point of what it was trying to convey. But anu royim, and what do we see in this process? That when you bring it all back round together into its essential point, the oisius are not as dominant. You then again appreciate the own muskul and not so much the oisius. In Chachma, there was not even any awareness that there were oisius in the first place. In Bina, for sure, in the process of chitzonius Bina, you for sure magish the oisius. That is oisius of machshava. But when you get back to the point and you got the deher of what the nakuda is supposed to be, you go back to a state of something which is a little bit more abstracted from the oisius of machshava. It's more a shaint. It's sort of the main focus you have there is the nakuda, is the muscles, the oir, not so much the keli of the oisius. So the same thing is true with Koyach HaChachma. Remember the principle that you got to bang into your head. So beli oisius, yeah. The lashon there, ki yesh l'shem gilu beli oisius, bli oisius, bli oisius. Interesting. ומכל מקום אני רואים כשנויפל לא יעזה המצוא והשכלה חדשה בבחינת בריקה סקירס השכל אינם ניכרים אצלי האיסיס כלל כי מרגיש את עיר ההשכלה שמי אצלי בגילוי רב האיסיס אינם ניכרים אצלי חולי. So what the experience is in Pnimius Bina is a similar experience that you have in Chachma. Not quite the same. I mean, the Isis are to an extent obviously going to be much more apparent than they would have been in Chachma. But still, you get to a point where you're basking, in a sense, in the Reichkeit, or the even the Reichkeit, the Emeskeit, the truth of the thing. When you have a creative idea, at that point the idea you don't know if it's true. It feels right. It feels right to you. It feels like a solution, but you haven't got ICs. You haven't got. It's not contained. It's not argued. At that point, it's very uncertain. After you go through the process of Chitzenis Bina, you then come to a degree of certainty about this idea that was previously just too abstract to have any self-awareness of. So it still goes back to a point of hafla, of wonderment, or appreciation, of geschmack of the haskala, but now it's with a lot more grounding and certainty. Yeah. Think about it, you look at a person can see a piece of art, a painting, sculpture, whatever floats your boat, and the first expression could be a feeling, an overwhelming feeling of awe, or whatever emotion it elicits. You can have like sort of just an immediate impression that piece of art might have on you, and then afterwards, someone asks you at that moment, what are you feeling, or what does this mean to you? And you couldn't put it into words. You're just too overwhelmed by the experience. afterwards, if you were to research the artist, research the materials that were used, the technique, analyze do a full analysis through your chitzonius bina, explaining this piece of art. So you could write a whole long thesis, give a lecture, explaining the complexity and what's so special about this piece of art. But then you could then still go back and see that piece of art after you've done all the research and still have an awareness of the appreciation of it that goes beyond the Osius that you said. In a sense, it would be like a distillation of everything you've understood about this thing, about the artist, the materials, and everything. And it now comes in, but it's, at that point, it's not about the pratim. Your shaylu, this is Lashon, shaylu kol pratim. At this reason, why am I enjoying this piece of art? It's not because the artist grew up in such a Ma'amad Matzav and the influences on his life from having this type of parenting or this type of schooling.
Cereal. This type of cereal.
Yeah, like all of the things I know about this person now, because I've done all the research. For sure, it contributes to why I appreciate it now, because I've got this rich appreciation of the piece of art. But if you ask me, is it at this moment, are those Osius Nikorim? Are they Nirgosh? Am I self-aware? But at that moment, it's you go back to the Nakuda, and it's the Eir of that thing, which is much more substantive, and not so much, and not even at all, the Osius. Yeah? Good. It's not just in Chachma, you have the same thing in Ratzin. The person has a very strong desire for something, as we've explained. There has to be Osius. You have an expression of yourself in some form or other, it's because there are Osius. It facilitates that expression. But at that moment, what is dominant is the Ratzin, not so much the Osius. You don't have a coherent, even in the self, you're not self-aware, you haven't thought through, you haven't got like a formula, I want X because of Y. I want it. The Ratzin is what's dominant, it's not the reasoning, the machshava, the Osius that might be associated with it. So after bevadi yisham eisi mikomokim einam nikorim v'nikoshim etzli klal ki margish l'rotzin levad. If you keep going deeper and deeper into the self, from bina, pnimius bina to chachma to rotzin, and then rotzin into the etzem hanefesh, you're going to have oisius there, but they're going to be completely behed hayeshes at all. She'ein nikorim klal. Asha adam in yidei ba'as miklal shishim oisius. If a person were to ask themselves, what am I fundamentally, deep down, who am I? He wouldn't say he's a bunch of oisius. The Osius are not there as a dominant or an apparent force. A person could claim there's no such thing as Osius in Etzem HaNefesh. But we have to say that there are Osius. Because if not, where did they come from? The person
that says that they don't come from Etzem Nefesh, what's he going to say? If we have to say it is an Etzem Nefesh, because otherwise where did they come from?
Everyone, maybe if you'll see from here, ultimate people will argue it comes from whatever people consider the Etzem. Some people think the Etzem Nefesh is Seichel.
Oh.
But they will say that it's from that.
Right.
From that place that is an Etzem. We can't say that the Osius come from the vocal cords or from the points of articulation of a hemshekh shisham Osius. We must say that there are Osius in the etzem hanefesh misham hemshechim l'chim sha'il saying ledaber. That's why when a person decides that they want to speak, miyad mistam hamitzois kanal, the body responds accordingly. Avol hemsham beheder yeshus kolkach. But when we talk about the Osius in the etzem hanefesh, they are beheder hayeshus. To the point where we don't even know they exist at all. So the various, on all madregas, starting from the etzem and all the way through from the ispashtus of the self, there are oisius. But the point here that we're trying to emphasize from the pasuk, Kavod malchuscha yemeru ugvurascha yidaberu, is the reason why the oisius go from a state of being completely beheder hayeshus to a state where they're beyeshus legamri in oisius hadibur, is because of the oir, because of the gevura in the oir. V'hinei hatam v'asivu b'hefresh anal b'oisius umitzad ha'oir. These oisius, etzem, in rotzein, in chochma, in pnimius bin, in chitzonius bin, in dibur, chitzonius bin, which is machshava, and in dibur is all mitzad ha'oir. To b'chol koyach naila yesa, sha'oir ha'nefesh b'y begilu yesa, shama oisius u'b'chinas heta yeshus yesa. So wherever the koyach is more sublime and is more begilui, the oisius are more behelim or beheder hayeshus. Chol mashem isamsim eira nefesh yesa, and as the eira nefesh is nisamsim, nasim oisius v'chinas yeshup yesa. The oisius emerge more as a yeshup matzias. In the Oisius HaMachshava, where the Eira Nefesh is much more revealed than it is in Dibur, can you do it? The Pnimius HaSeichel, Pnimius HaMidus, Sheyefshu Slavish B'Dibur. How do you mislavish B'Oisius HaMachshava? Maybe take of Nebius HaSeichel, but take of his Pilus HaMidus, Ba'abi Yisera, B'Kas Yisera. Eini Yochel Adaber. So, in Machshava, the Keiches of Seichel and Midus, Pnimius Seichel, Pnimius Midus, are able to be mislabish in machshava. You're able to think about it. You're able to, process things in your machshava. But if it's so intense, when it's so intense, you can't speak about it. You're able to think about it, about that seichel, that midah, but talk about it, you can't. Because the pnimius is mislabish in machshava. Meaning to say that in machshava, there's able to be a greater gilui of nefesh, just like we said in the first maimah, right? And when we were arguing about how is it possible that dib is out to have the impact, machshava is higher than dib. Is a klirishin compared to dib. So that's why the oisius in machshava are so much more bedakus, because there's a greater gilui of nefesh. Where there's a greater gilui of nefesh, there is a greater dakus, or subtlety in the oisius. But it can get to a point where the intensity of the idea or the emotion is so extreme that you can't even think about it. You can get confused. You can't, be masada your thoughts in a normal way. It becomes a tumult from the whole experience. So it's because there's such a gilu of nefesh, that the oisius of machshava are not kalim for such an oid. Whatever the case, it is the case that in oisius of machshava there is a greater gilu of nefesh and there is in dibur. And that explains why the oisius of machshava are bedakus yesa and the oisius of dibur are beyeshus yesa. Good. Like what I just said. Yeah?
Yeah.
And in pnimius bina, where we said the person is not aware of the oisius, where you have this tamsis haseicheli shemer shama oir, ukiyadu the ribu hapratim hariheim malim mastirim al etzim dakus eira muskul kemish kos makom acher lozois bebechinas pnimius bina sheshayla les hapratim v'teifis rak nekudat tamsis harimeir oz eira muskul yesa lechin shama oisius eina mugoshin kol kach. So machshava we said is in chitzonius bina, but if you go to pnimius bina, where there is a shlilus kol hapratim, where it's no longer all about the prati pratim, about why you're so nisbar from this piece of art, the dogma we gave, and it's all back again about the nekuda hatamsis of why this piece of art is so impressive. There, the oisius not mogashim kukach, because there's a more of a gilu oir. Uva koyach hachachma. When you go even further, deeper, beyond Pnimis Bina, into Chachma, where the Eir is very much revealed in the creative self. Kenira B'chush, again, this recall to a person's experience. In that moment when you get a creative new idea, it's incomparable to the way it would ultimately be experienced in the Me'ach HaBina. There's a complete lack of Yeshus Oisius because there's such a strong Gilu Eir HaNefesh. To the point where it's as if they don't exist at all. Rotzen is even a greater Gilu of Nefesh than you have in Chachma. You don't have any awareness of the Oisius. So he's gone through the whole Seder to apply the point that he's made. All the way through. That where there is a greater Gilu Eir, there's a greater Heder HaYeshus of the Oisius. And when there's a reduced Gilu Eir, there is more of a Yeshus of the Oisius.
When was the Yeshus of the Oisius? That means that
the Yeshus of the Oisius are able to be Niskala Lazulas, and they're able to be Mailemul Master completely on the Eir HaNefesh.
What if there's a really big Gilu Eir Seichel? Then it can't.
You're not able to speak.
So if you've got a really great idea, you'll never ever be able to explain to somebody else?
It has to be Nisamtze. Has to go through the process. From if it's a Gilu Eir HaChachma, you'll be stuck.
But you can't.
You're not even aware there's Oisius there in the first place.
But you can do it in a way that they'll be able to get to the point where you were in the first place.
You have to go through a stage. You have to go through a Tzimtzum. The Eir HaChachma has to come down to Bina, and then from Bina it has to be Nishtalshul further and further to the point where you can come to the Nislam Shin Dibur. Like it is known, for the nefesh to be able to be mechayah the guf, there has to be a tzimtzum in the nefesh for it to be able to be mislabish in the guf. Now we're broadening, we're not talking about internal sort of processes from etzem nefesh to eisis hadibur. Talking about a more klodistic reality, that for the nefesh to be able to be mislabish in the guf, which the guf is mamash adoinin, mamash yesh, and mamash helen behester. For that to be possible, there has to be a tzimtzum in the oir. Ki etzem oir nefesh k'meishahu eine begeder b'chinas chayis lahachis haguf. The etzem nefesh as it is on its own is not in a state where it's viable for it to enliven a body. Lo mi boy shan nefesh atzmein begeder lahachis elegama oir v'agilu yakolu boy. The nefesh mizatzmai is not in a state where it's capable, neither itself, neither its hispashis, none of it. It's not shaykh to a guf. The process of the it's not the pshat that the nefesh or its hispashis achayis, wherever another level, is a perfect match for the guf. No, they're not compatible. In order for them to become compatible, there has to be a tzimtzum in the nefesh. So before that process of tzimtzum, before the nefesh comes into the guf, there's definitely there's no anything, there's seichel midas. It's Avan Yira. We talked about that before, how the Nefesh has all those things before it comes into Mislabish and the Guf. But there isn't Machshav, there's no Machshav. There's no Dibur. So, in order for these things, and whilst that Nefesh is not Mislabish and the Guf, prior to its Mislabish and the Guf, the Isis are not Nikorim. Not Nikorim, not Negoshim, they're not sensed. Uvereish is Tzimtzum HaNefesh, Nasim HaIsis B'chinas Dovim Ma. So when the Nefesh is Mitzamtzim itself to Mislabish Naguf, that begins the process by which the Isis can become substantive entities. There is inevitably Isis. Right? You have to acknowledge the existence of Isis everywhere, in all stages of the Nefesh, both prior to its establishment in the Guf, and then after every stage. But the question that we were asking is, where do these Isis Hadibur, how do these Isis Hadibur emerge? They don't come from the Mitzvah Sapeh. They don't come from the Koil Hadibur. They come from the Etzem HaNefesh ultimately. And it's through a process of Tzimtzum Ha'oir that the Isis Hadibur are able to emerge in a in the way that they do, such that they can be Niskala El Azulas.
You said before, by the way, that different people have different opinions, like ideas of what Etzem Nefesh would be. So what is our Etzem Nefesh? Rabbi Shabs, what do you consider Etzem Nefesh? Like Kesser, what is it?
Kesser is not. What do you want to name? What do you want to name?
You said some people would consider Etzem Nefesh to be Chachma.
Right. Etzem is Etzem, Biltim is Basha, Biltim is Chalik, Biltim is Tsuya. All the inyanim of Etzem that we've described. Right?
Okay.
So above and beyond all of those categorizations.
Higher than every categorization.
Correct.
So it's not a category.
It is. Wait till the next man. Have a good discussion about that.
Okay.
Whether Etzem is a category.
Well, the fact that you call it Etzem makes it into a category, but is that?
It's just for lack of a better word. But you're right.
Okay.
That was my Nitzavim Memches. It says that even you can't even say that the Etzem is also Madrega, because if you're giving it a name, it must be already a Madrega. Yeah, it's a to be discussed, but it's not the place for it now. Above and beyond everything that you can think it can be is a good way of starting.
Right, but that's like Yitzira or Asiyah.
No, but it's the idea is Ashlila. It's anything you know, it's not that.
Right.
But Hainu, if Neisha can kvar nisamsi meira nefesh, the eine meir kumeshahu lachin ha'isi yisham be'ezem etziyisma. That once you have the symptom of the nefesh, it facilitates the plausibility that you can have these Isis which are a metzias, Isis adibu. And it goes through the whole, expansion of the self in whatever direction it is. That the more that the Eir Nefesh is nisamsim, the more yeshus the Isis have. Geen yeir madreg na madrega. Keich ha-chachma ha-Isis beginnes yesh yesem bekeich ha-taining ba'aratzim. Bebina yesem beginnes chachma. The bechtenis bina Isis negoshim la'atzmi. Ad shebedibu sheshama ein mitzumsim b'yesem. Each stage, you get more and more yeshus to the Isis, to the point where you get to Isis ha-dibur, where the Eir is extremely mitzumtzum, and you have Isis beginnes yesh. L'zeis, shama Isis beginnes yesh mamish. Ad shemugoshim gamel azulas. So you get to the point of Isis ha-dibur, there's such a yesh that somebody else is also able to be aware of them. It's a nim to move mikol now. All of the above. This long arichis. What have we proven? The tzimtzum ha'eir hu sibus yeshus Isis. It's in a sense the Pnimius Bina. This is the Tamtis. Simsum ha'oir hu sibus yeshus ha'oisius. Why is this important? We don't want from the first two Maimorim, from Yom Tov Rosh Hashanah and Yechayinim Yumayim, you could be forgiven for thinking that there's these two realms of existence. There's the realm of the Mashpia, the Oir, and there's the realm of the Makabel, the Kli. And they're two parallel existences. If you put one together with the other, you get the ultimate result, whether it's a greater gilui la'atzmai, or in this context you get the ability for it to be conveyed to a zulas. But what we're emphasizing over here is that these two tchunis, these two characteristics of mashpia and makabel don't exist in isolation from each other, but they are dependent on each other as they emerge together. What is the point of the Oir? Ultimately, what do we want to achieve?
Gilui.
But if we have a Gilui, then there won't be a Davar Nifrat. Hashem wants to say, go out of the self now. Talk about it in the bigger picture, which is what we're going to do in the next year. How I understand this Lamaila. What is the impact, the relevance of these ideas? What does Hashem want to do?
Make a world.
He wants to make a world. What is a world?
A Helam and Alikus.
A Helam and Alikus. Or more specifically, he wants to create the Varim Nifradim. He wants to create a Yeshem Metzias V'Davar Nifra B'fnei Atzmi. He wants to create Eilam Hazi. He wants to create Eilam Biyah. And that they should serve Hashem. Right? Through Torah mitzvahs, they should be Mamshich Atm Seir and Seif Lamata. How are you going to get Atm Seir and Seif into this world? How are you going to make that work? What are the problems of doing that? The problems of doing that are that as soon as you convey that to be your intention,
it's no longer the world.
Everything gets blown up. It combusts. It becomes implausible. So you want it to exist, but yet at the same time,
that's the work.
So you want two things that are seemingly in conflict with each other. What are the two things? You want metzius, you want elikus. When we say elikus, you want atzmus, but you want it to be begilui. And so, if that is the ultimate kavanah, you have to appreciate that in all of the processing that's going along, we're not talking about two conflicting forces. The whole purpose of Gilui is not in opposition to the Helam. The whole purpose of Helam is not in opposition to the Gilui.
Helam is a Gilui of sorts.
Everyone's working towards the same end. Everything is imbued with the same kavanah. So, the Oir, when it's mitzamtzim as atzmai, in order for the emergence of the Yeshus ha'oisius, facilitates what's ultimately going to be the emergence of Dvarim Nifradim, right? So it's in its own interest. We don't have to talk about a sort of two campaigns, the campaign for Oir and the campaign for Osius, and they're both trying to vie for Hashem's patronage. No, because that's how you can sort of start to think about it, about the Oirs and Kelim, how they're working in sort of opposition to each other. But by realizing that the emergence of the Osius tzimtzum ha'oir hu sibas yeshus ha'oisius, it transforms the oisius into no longer being the oppositional force that they may have been seen to be, that may have been thought of. The mashpi and the makabel, being in all the madregas that we talked about in the first two Maimorim, seichel and dibur, ish ve'isha, Torah Yisrael, that they both are dependent on each other to achieve what they think is which is fundamentally the ultimate aim. You can't have one without the other. Because you could say, well, and we're going to ask this at the end ultimately. If Oisius are so fantastic, if Dibur is so important, if Makabel is so important, why do we need Oir? Why are we wasting our time with Oir? If it's an Inyan Atzmi. Oisius come from Etzem HaNefesh. Just stick with Oisius. Just stick with Oisius. Why do we need to go through all this? Just talk nonsense. Oisius are so good. Talk nonsense. It's a spara. Talk nonsense. Why do they have to have the Oir HaSeichel, Oir HaMiddos? Just talk gibberish. You still have the Oisius. You realize it's a silly argument in one sense. But in Svara, we've got to understand why is it important to have the Oir? What function does the Oir provide? We spent a whole arichas in the first two Maimorim about the Milas HaMakabel, the Milas HaKli. Over here we're talking about why Hashem wanted to create the world in Midas Hadin. And he's in order that there should be Mamash HaHelam V'Hester. But this is going to leave resounding questions, which we'll be dealing with in the third section. But we're setting everything up. But instead of getting ahead of ourselves, just to conclude on this point, we're bringing a mashal of Dibur, which is the mashal of Malchus of Atzilus, to explain how it was possible for what would be the model of creating the world of Midas Hadin. That when you have Oisius HaDibur, they are an Oisius b'bechinas Yesh, and they're Mailim Umasti on the Oir. But you've also got to remember that within that context, how do those Oisius become such Oisius Mugoshim, Oisius b'bechinas Yesh? It's through the Tzimtzum of the Oir. The Tzimtzum ha'Oir hu sibas Yeshus ha'Oisius. So what that does is it gives you different levers now. Do you understand? If you realize that the sibas Yeshus ha'Oisius, and the Yeshus ha'Oisius is the condition by which it becomes possible for there to be existence, b'bechinas Yesh, you now have a lever. It's not just a brick wall that blocks everything, right? These are Oisius that have emerged min ha'helam el hagilui. What would happen if you would be mitzamtzim the Oir a lot? You dim the lights a lot. Yeah? If you dim the lights, the Oir would be mitzamtzim considerably. Then the Oisius would become more b'yeshus, right? If you wanted to make, just take this one. Some people will be atheists. Some people will be agnostic. Some people will be secular. Some people experience shkacha pratis. There's gilu elikus, tzadikim. There's people have different experiences of this world, right? And you could argue that some people, they have more of a gilu eir, and some people have less of a gilu eir. Learn more Torah, you can have more of a gilu eir belikus and what? You have more of a skashus to tzadikim, you can have a more of a shayim, yeah?
Yeah.
So there's a way of creating this world where you're mitzamtzim la'oir considerably, such that the Oisius are mamish b'bechinas Yesh, such that a person is completely unaware of Elikus. There's another way in which you can not be mitzamtzim la'oir so much. If you're not mitzamtzim la'oir so much, then the Oisius are not so mugoshim. And then there's more of a gilu elikus in the world. You could even say there's a difference between Shabbos and the weekdays. There's different The Tzimtzum Ha'or is the lever which determines, it's not just the Oisius Adibur, it doesn't matter what O you're going to throw about it, these Oisius Adibur are going to be Mailable Master Legamri. That's not how it works. It's through the manipulation of the O which adjusts the dimmer, so to speak, of the Elikus which is in the world. It can be completely off, closed off Legamri, or it can be different levels of darkness. Different levels of light is another way of saying different levels of darkness. Right? And so this introduces a very important component about the creation. Hashem wanted to create the world Midas Hadin, which was to be Matzamtim La'or considerably, such that the Oisius will be B'chinas Yesh. And we're going to see Shittim Midas Harachamim, because he saw that the world was not able to be miskaim. There would be such a turning off of the lights. The Yeshus Ha'oisius would be to such an extent we would have no clue about Likus. But again, we'll get to that when we get to it.